This is Create the Next from Pro CFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
Welcome back to Create the Next. I'm Chris Metliff, and Art Troccoli is with us today. And Art, I'm looking forward to our conversation because we're talking a little bit about improving valuation and improving profitability. There's a relationship there, and I'm going to let you kind of get into it. But I think sometimes we can think about, oh, these are the secret ingredients to improving valuation, or not even, all that secret. We need to make sure X, Y, and Z. Or we can think, to increase profitability, we need to do X, Y, and Z. But I think that there's deeper conversation to that. I think that there's some nuances to that maybe we don't necessarily always keep in mind. The stuff we got to do before we get to the stuff we got to do. So welcome. And I'm wondering, what is the first thing that you think of or that you like to discuss when we're thinking about specifically increasing valuation, maybe through increasing profitability and through mergers and acquisitions? What's the first thing that you like to think about?
Sure. There's a lot of things, obviously, that affect valuation, Chris, and some of them are outside of our control, right? Economic conditions, interest rates in the market, things like that. But of the things that are within our control, and there's a lot of them we're going to talk about, one thing that pops to the forefront with me a lot of times is having a solid financial footing, to have your financial house in order, to be able to explain to a banker, a potential buyer, capital markets, how your P&L really works and what substantiates it, how your balance sheet is solid and what substantiates that. So having your financial house in order and really being able to explain to outside entities, what your company's about financially is really one of the first things that comes to mind. And there's a lot of things involved, but that's one of the things that's really core to me.
And if for you, is that a function of, make sure your reporting is on point, make sure your spreadsheets look good, or is there more to it? Is there a deeper sensibility that we have to have before we are thinking about the stuff that's going inside, all of our reports?
Well, you really do have to, Chris. I think, some of the key things are, what your financial controls are. How do those financials come together? Many firms that we deal with are firms that are not audited and don't need to be audited. But you could look at your financials and say, if I were audited, are these financials going to be solid? Or is the way that these things come together, is our cash accounted for as it comes in? Are we really accounting for these things properly? And would it stand an audit if we had one? That to me is kind of a measuring stick.
What's the relationship between, because when you talk about an audit, I'm kind of thinking about a moment in time, or reports are we're looking at the past a little bit. But what's the relationship between that and looking ahead, strategic perspective, vision? Here's what these numbers mean in context to all these other things that we have cooking.
One of the big things that you kind of start with is, what's the strategic vision of the firm? Where do they want to be down the line? What do they want to be? And also kind of tied into that, what is the owners or the ownership's mission in that? Do they want to sell the firm? Do they want to grow it for legacy? Do they want to pass it to family? Those are all things that need to be considered. And really, when we talk to the future, once you know what that strategic plan is, that's great. A lot of firms have wonderful strategic plans. A lot of them don't back it up with the nuts and bolts tactical planning that you need to achieve that strategy. And that's a key thing, to really lay out, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do for the next 6 months? What are we going to do for the next year? What are we going to do in the coming years? And how are we going to get to what that strategic vision is? And really have that plan laid out. That's important internally, even if you're not looking for any kind of external funding or anything like that. It's extremely important to lay out your growth plans and how you really hope to achieve those growth plans. If you're talking to outside entities about funding or about selling your firm, just really key to look at that in terms of being able to have a credible forecast is really built on you have the credible plan as to how you're going to achieve your goals.
Why do you think that is? Why are we keen to have, pretty solid strategic plan or vision, or at least we think we do? I think it can sometimes be suspect, but why do we then struggle with and here's the stuff we need to do? Why does the tactics fall apart?
Well, I think, a lot of times people running the firm know where they want to go, and they see it. It's clear to them what they're going to do. You need that nuts and bolts plan for one thing, so that everyone who is working towards that goal understands it and knows what is expected of them to do that, to get to the strategy. Again, senior leadership may very well know what the long-term plan is and how they want to get there. But unless there's a real good tactical nuts and bolts plan on how to get there, it becomes very difficult to translate that to the folks who are going to have to carry out that plan in the organization.
Is it less accessible? Like we can sit down and say, I'm the owner and I want to make sure that I'm retired by X, or I'm going to leave, my legacy wants to be A, B, and C. I can daydream about that. I can think about that and I can put this point on the horizon. Is it harder for me to reverse engineer and here's how I'm going to do it? Do I need a different level of skills? Do I need more help? Do I need something that I don't necessarily inherently or internally have?
Sometimes that's the case. I mean, it really depends on, how deeply involved the owner or the leader is in the day-to-day operation of the organization. But certainly they're going to need to pull in some of their key people to put that plan together, because no matter how close you think you are to the day-to-day operation, there are people doing really important tasks in your company that you don't know as deeply as they know them. And if you're going to change the way that's done, you really need to have those folks, internalize that and live it and really move towards those goals.
So when I think about valuation, and if I think about part of that vision for me is I want to increase the value of my company, I guess talk me through some of those relationships. So strategically, I want to be here. Tactically, I need to roll this out. Is that where I start to think about, so this is where an acquisition would really help, or this is where we need to, everybody look at our profitability and bump up by 3 points in the next 3 years? Or how do I start to think about that when it comes to this idea of again, those numbers on the spreadsheet? What am I looking for?
Again, it really depends on a lot on what your aim is. If you're going to look at M&A or selling the company, or you're just looking to increase the value of your firm to make it, easier to obtain financing to grow. So a lot of that depends on what your aim is. But really, what you want to start looking at, if you're looking at the M&A side, is, what is the strategic fit of where you want to go with that? Do you want to just obtain another company that's in the same space you're in, to have a bigger chunk of the pie, as it were? Or do you want to obtain a company that has a slightly different bent that you can expand into other areas? Or do you want to try to do that on your own? Do you have the resources, let's say people and infrastructure resources, assume you can raise the funds, to move into a new area without acquiring another firm? Those are some of the things you really have to think about as you're saying, how you're going to go about this next step. Is this something you're going to do internally? Is this something that you need to move externally to your company to achieve what that goal is?
If I'm looking at an acquisition, when do I consider it as, I guess, kind of a defensive move? Like, well, this company, everybody, if we don't buy it, they're going to go buy it, and that's going to put us, in a different position. How, there's a way to think about it where it's like, this would really work out well for us, but there's also a way of thinking about it like, we don't want to do this, but if we don't, we might be. Does that come into play?
Well, I don't think if you go into something with the attitude that we don't want to do this, it's probably going to fail.
A little bit hyperbole, right? Isn't it?
But yeah. So, but let's look at it this way. There are kind of two different defensive moves you might make in acquiring a company. One might be somewhat what you mentioned there, which is, if we don't buy this firm, another competitor is going to, and that will put us in a bad position. The other, I would call it defensive move, is we're in a market that's just not going to grow, right? We've got whatever market share we have, and we're doing well, but it's not a growth market, and it's not going to be a growth market. And over time, that'll tend to, your costs are going to rise, and you just won't do well over time being in a non-growth market. So the defensive move there might very well be to pick up, take an interest in a firm that does have growth potential. So there's two different ways to look at, a defensive move, if you will, Chris.
I think that's interesting because, especially if we're in a market, it makes me wonder if we're thoughtful about making sure that we're in our sweet spot. That we're not taking on something that we can't make grow because we're not experts in this thing, or this is slightly different, or their market is a little bit more dynamic than what we're used to, or whatever. Do you see that a lot? Do you see, we thought this was really going to work, but it's turned out to be a struggle because this isn't where we play ball the best?
Well, you can, but what a lot of that comes into is in the integration planning. If you are moving into an M&A situation, one of the key things is to have a real integration plan before the deal closes. How are we going to combine these firms? Because one of the key things that you can do if you are moving into a different area or a slightly different area is, everyone looks at cost savings in a merger and acquisition situation. And for good reason, there's often some very good cost savings that can be wrung out of something. But what people often fail to do is look at what are the revenue potentials of additional revenue potential of an acquisition, not just adding what the current revenue is of the other company to yours, but is there a potential there for cross-selling if they are in different product areas between the two different sales forces? And if not, if you're obtaining a company in the same market niches that you're already in, does that give you a big enough position to perhaps be in a position where you can raise prices? So there's a lot of ways to look at it, not just from a cost saving standpoint, because there's tons of things you need to look at for cost savings in a merger or acquisition, but also from revenue enhancement. And that's one of the things that I think sometimes people overlook when they're looking, thinking M&A, at least initially.
Talk to me a little bit more about this integration plan. What are some of the nuts and bolts that I should make sure are part of that? And especially how do I put that into play when it seems like something needs to move quickly? If this window might close and this just came up and we really kind of got to move quickly on this, is it something I should have in my back pocket and kind of be ready to deploy, or is it something that I need to build quickly on the fly? It's provided I don't have a lot of time and luxury to really get into the weeds with this.
It really depends. I mean, for one thing, if you're in a firm that's done acquisitions before, you probably have a little bit of a game plan in your back pocket. And some of the things are somewhat generic when you look at potential cost savings of, can we combine some back office operations? What types of services are we going to look at to have potential savings? And it's everything from your insurance to telecom to your suppliers. You can look at all of those, and as you have higher volumes in those areas, you should be able to negotiate better rates for all your ongoing services. But one of the key things is, if you're integrating, is to look at the key people in each group and say, A, have a plan, which are the people that we really want to make sure that we keep, and B, who's going to run these different areas. You have two sales managers, okay? You should know before you go in, is the sales manager of your existing firm going to be the new sales manager, or are you acquiring this other firm and they've got a hot shot sales manager and you're going to put that person in charge? Those are some of the key things you want in an integration plan, is who is going to run the different pieces of the organization. I've seen some very large integration plans stumble and maybe not ultimately fail, but took way too long to achieve the cost benefits that they hoped to, because they had really no plan in place when the deal closed, even though the deal took a while to close. And it took months and months, and in some cases close to a year, to make some of those decisions as to who the people were in the different slots. And as a result, you not only didn't get the cost savings, you didn't get a lot of the revenue enhancements out of the gate that you would have hoped to from cross-selling, because you're too busy figuring out who's going to steer the different pieces, the different ships in the fleet, if you will.
I think that's a really good point about extending the length of optimal performance, and how, it might work, but it might take 3 times as long to start working because we didn't do this. How culture has to have a play in that then, right? I mean, you have to be, maybe your sales manager has been here forever and that person's great and widely respected, but maybe they're not like up to speed on the newest stuff, or maybe this new person will come in and be great, or maybe this new person will come in and just not. Like, how much do I need to think about, is this the right people fit?
I think it's really important. And of course, part of that depends on the nature of the business too. And if you're buying a company that's basically a clone of the company you have, that you're just buying, for accretive revenue and hopefully cost savings. But it's really key. I mean, you can have the greatest plan in the world and you put the wrong people in the wrong seats, and it's not, if not fail, it's going to take a long time for it to work. I mean, that's something that you should, the people piece of any integration is probably one of the single most important pieces. Along those lines, one of the things you want to look at is who are the key people that you want to make sure you keep, because as we all know, and you want to keep them well informed, and you may want to put in some, some bonus plans for folks to stay, because as we all know, in the absence of facts, people usually imagine the worst. So if they know an integration, a merger is coming, and they don't know and haven't been told, that they have a role going forward, they may assume that there is going to be layoffs and they may be part of them. So you need to talk to people and communicate not only to your people, but to as many stakeholders as possible. You probably want to talk to suppliers once the deal is no longer secret. Talk to as many people as you can and keep them well informed, because people will assume the worst if they don't have facts.
And now you're touching on interesting aspects of trust and communication and other cultural stuff that for me goes back into you got to make sure this is on point before you start digging into that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely.
As you're sharing all of this, it's making me feel like, boy, I'm really glad Art is next to me as I'm considering all these changes. What should I be expecting from my CFO? Because the part about, hey, are all our numbers on point? That seems like table stakes. Of course, that person is going to come in and help us make sense of the spreadsheets. But you're offering some guidance here that maybe it's stuff I've thought of, but a lot of it is stuff that I would want to say, tell me more about that, or let's dig in, or boy, I hadn't thought of that. What should my CFO be doing for me as I'm the executive, the leader, the CEO, and I'm considering these things? I need this voice in my ear to kind of help me do what?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the CFO is going to be very concerned about, making sure the financials are right and that it makes sense financially given the plan that's put together. But really, an experienced CFO is going to be bringing up all of these things that we've been talking about: the people issues, the integration of services, which takes quite a while sometimes. I've been involved where we didn't have all the information on some of the services of the contracted services that the firm that we were buying had, and some of them had 2 and 3 year commitments that were very hard to get out of, that cost us money to get out of. So those are all things that an experienced CFO is going to have you looking at. Again, and also one of the things you want to look at in terms of this that an experienced CFO will bring to you is to look at the risk management aspects of any acquisition. You may look at a firm, and depending on their history, you may not want to buy the whole firm. You may want to buy certain assets of the firm. You may want to buy out their book of business and not buy the firm for various risk management reasons. You also, one of the things that the CFO is going to look at besides, having numbers on table is with, the new merged entity, does the old financial structure of the firm make sense anymore? Or do you really need to look at how the firm is structured in terms of capital, in terms of efficient tax structure, things like that? So those are really some of the things that are beyond, the having solid accounting and bookkeeping, which is, kind of table stakes, as you said. But those are things that you really have to count on an experienced CFO to bring to the table in an M&A situation.
Art Troccoli is that experienced CFO, a principal here at Pro CFO Partners. Thank you so much for this. I feel like we just scratched the surface, and there's stuff, even in the last 30 seconds, you mentioned risk management, and I thought, oh boy, we could really dig into that. So I hope you'll come back and we can just kind of pick apart pieces of this M&A stuff. It's so complex and dynamic and big, and can be intimidating and can be problematic, but it can also be just a huge success. And I think knowing the ins and outs is something that only time and experience and expertise, can yield. And for many of us, we might do it once or twice in our whole career. Some of us will do it a lot, but having the guidance of somebody like you is really valuable. And I'm grateful for your expertise today. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Chris. Have a great day.
Thanks.